Hey, Tyler Banks, how are you?
Good morning, Julie. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Okay, so we are going to talk about the age-old question today about flood or water damage.
hmm
That is the question. So I don't know about you, but this is a question that I've been getting for literally decades, and I'm probably showing my age right now. But this is something that we talk about all the time because people are always questioning if it's going to be covered with the homeowners policy or if it's going to be flood and what determines a flood trigger versus a water damage trigger. So
And
that's
and
kind
the
of
other
what,
question, and Julie, the other question: flood or no flood? Right? I mean,
right?
how many times are clients asking us, "Do I need flood? Am I in a flood zone? Do I, how much flood coverage do I need for my home?
You
Does
know what, Tyler? That's a perfect segue for the first piece of trivia I want to ask you. So, as we all know, everyone is in a flood zone, right? It just
hmm
depends if you're in a high risk flood zone or if you're in a low risk flood zone. So, my question to you is what percentage of flood claims happens outside the major flood zones, the A zone and the V zone? Do you
Ooh,
have
a
an
trivia
idea?
question? I love trivia questions. I think it's about 40%. Forty
You're right.
percent of floods happen outside of a flood zone. So most
You're
people
right.
think, well, if I'm not in a flood zone, I don't need flood insurance, but in actuality, they need, flood insurance because there's a very high percentage that they could be impacted by a flood.
Yep. So, and that what not only are they impacted by a flood, but also they don't have the flood insurance, right? Because if it's
hmm
not lender required, then they aren't required to purchase it if it's not in a major flood zone. So a lot of these people, those 40% people may not even have flood insurance. So it's a first dollar paid out of their pocket, right?
People need to be aware of their exposure to flood. And if their policy is insufficient, it warrants a discussion.
Well, and the thing is, most people think that flood insurance should be purchased in the coastal areas, right? In Florida
Now,
is the main one, right? But if you think about it, my next piece of trivia, do you have an idea of what are the top three most significant flood events that the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, has deemed to be the biggest payouts?
I think obviously the largest one was in New Orleans, right?
Yep,
Katrina.
Katrina. Yep,
And I think that lives in a lot of people's memories because you could visualize the Superdome and the people going into the Superdome and, having the Superdome, roof kind of fly off and the recovery efforts afterwards. So that one is by far the largest one in recent memory.
yep.
You could probably share the other two with us as well.
The next one is Superstorm Sandy,
hmm
right? In 2012. And then the last one was Hurricane Harvey, which was in 2017. The interesting thing is none of these happened in Florida.
That's
They were in
right.
Louisiana, they were Texas, and they were the Northeast. So the people that think that they need insurance, flood insurance, are the ones that are on the coast, right? That are, in Florida or on the east coast of the Southeast, like Georgia, North Carolina. None of them's happened there. Those are the largest storms, and none of them happened there. So that's the whole interesting fact about flood insurance that no matter where you are, you really truly need it. You could be in the mountains of North Carolina and still need flood insurance, right? So, but that's flood insurance, as you're going to tell us, is very different than what water damage is. So, flood insurance, you need a separate policy. Water damage, it's a homeowner's policy. So, there's a lot of claims when it comes to water damage as well.
Yeah, the way I was taught about flood versus water damage is flood is water coming up
Yep.
and water damage is water coming down. I think the frequency of it is quite alarming. Recognizing that I think it's between 25 to 30% of all homeowner claims are water losses. So that's a significant percentage of losses when it comes to a homeowner's claim is directly involves a loss, due to water and a water loss can be multiple reasons, right? I think you can share with us some of the top reasons for a water loss inside of a home. What are some like the three top things that a client would have a water loss
I
for?
mean, honestly, I would say like pipe bursting.
Mm-hmm.
It could be anything from honestly a pipe bursting to appliances, a refrigerator, ice maker leaking. It could be a hot water, you know, heater leaking. It could be a roof damage coming through the ceiling. It kind of all depends, but there's so many different scenarios that that would justify water damage. And honestly, this stuff could happen when you're away on vacation.
I think you and I have talked about, whether you've had a water claim or I've had a water claim, and was yes to both, right? I mean, in my situation, it was self-inflicted, meaning I was my own plumber because I thought I could install the faucet on my own, and I over tightened, one of the gaskets, and unfortunately it started leaking hot water, and I was out of town for 3 days, and I was living in a townhome at the time, and the water damage went through 3 floors through my garage, and water was pouring out of my garage. So there's nothing more disruptive than coming home after 3 days and having, restoration company there to lift up your carpets with the big fans, taking out the drywall. There are opportunities now to reduce that total exposure, for those water losses. Might happen about 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, they didn't have the same technology that we have now.
I have like a water detection unit, right, in my house. I'm sure you do too. And honestly, the insurance companies will give discounts for that stuff. So why wouldn't you, right? I mean, that kind of stuff, if you're going to get a discount year after year on your homeowner's insurance, why not actually have that device? It's in the grand scheme of things, it's not that expensive to install.
Well, I would actually say it's actually mandatory now. So question for you, wind-driven rain, is that a flood, exposure, or is it a, water loss?
It's a water loss. Yep, it's a homeowner's claim because it's not rising. Now, that's the whole gray area, right? When there's a storm and there are tornadoes coming from hurricanes and there's like, you're sitting right on the water, what is the gray area? Is it the storm surge that caused the damage, or is it wind-driven rain,
flood?
Right?
Is storm surge flood, or is it,
Storm
water
surge
damage?
is flood.
Yeah.
Storm surge is flood. Seeping water in a basement, that's seepage, that's flood. Flood is basically determined if it's two adjacent properties and that there's an excessive amount of water, right? So, but it has to be a definition of a flood in order for it to be considered and triggered on a flood policy.
So let's talk about flood for a little bit here. So on a flood policy, what are some of the restrictions that we see on an NFIP policy?
Other structures.
Yeah.
You can't, you have to endorse that, or you have to get a separate policy on. The restriction is if it's actual loss sustained, if you have to go someplace else to live. The limitations, we talked about the capped out limitations. I mean, you can have a multi-million-dollar house, and an NFIP policy is only going to give you $250,000 to replace that house.
That's right.
Right? There's limitations on sometimes equipment or subgrade levels of a home. That's all stuff that needs to be discussed with people to be able to actually educate them about what's covered and what's not.
So what that has fostered is the introduction of a private flood, marketplace. And we're starting to see more options for private flood. And we've seen a big appetite for carriers to kind of jump in and offer alternatives to an NFIP policy.
And some excess flood policies, you can get additional coverages that the NFIP may not be able to offer on that policy, right? And you can get up to whatever limit that the replacement cost of the home is. You don't have to, it's not, it's not required that you have to have a certain amount. You can kind of tailor it exactly what kind of coverage that you want. So if you have a $5 million house and you only want to buy $2 million worth of coverage, you can do that. And you don't have to buy contents coverage along with that. So there are options, especially for the high valued homes.
Great. So you get the primary flood, and then you can get excess flood that sits on top of that primary flood. You can get full coverage, or you can just get a certain amount of coverage that you feel is warranted for your property. So if you got a client that has a basement and it's unfinished, is it going to be covered, or is it not going to be covered under an NFIP policy? Right? We've got some limitations there.
The other thing too, that honestly that we've come across is sometimes with like the California fires, the houses are burnt, right? So it's a vacant piece of land, but all of a sudden torrential downpour, and all of a sudden there are mudslides and there's flooding, due because there's nothing to sustain and keep this water from rolling down a mountain, right? So a lot of the floods actually come when, there's been a wildfire and there's no vegetation to kind of soak up that water.
Yeah,
So people that think that there's no flooding in, you know, areas that aren't coastal, then that's just a misconception for sure.
that's right. So you take like a hurricane, like Hurricane Harvey, right? That was a massive loss there in Texas. It was a hurricane that just was very slow and had a lot of moisture and dumped a ton of rain in a small concentrated area for a prolonged period of time, right?
Yep.
So you don't have to be next to a river, a stream, or even an ocean to experience a flood.
You make a good point. Like, so Superstorm Sandy, you mentioned it affected the Northeast, right? New York and New Jersey. It completely changed the entire landscape of the insurance industry, the insurance in the Northeast region. Like the insurance companies after that, they started revamping how they look at the Northeast and how they think about rating and underwriting just because of Superstorm Sandy, because it just sat there like for days and rained for days and days and days. So it can completely change the landscape of insurance.
Let's go back a little bit to water losses in homes, because a lot of times we get called and there is a small pinhole leak that's happening behind a wall that they were not aware of until they start to see like a bubble in their ceiling, right? Or see some discoloration, right? Julie, that happened with you. Is something like that usually covered under a policy if it's been like a slow, prevalent leak that's happened over an extended period of time?
And it depends too, right? On what the actual cause of loss is. Like if it's a covered loss, it could be that the ensuing damages are covered, but maybe not the actual physical thing that actually caused the damage, depending if it was an installation error. No, Tyler,
I know
installation
that was
error.
my bad.
Or it could be like a product malfunction or, something like that. But the ensuing damages are typically covered underneath the homeowner's policy. The other thing that honestly that we need to kind of, you know, discuss quickly is mold. Like if that stuff is not taken care of in a timely manner, especially in the warmer climates, mold can start to, and then there's typically like a cap on how much a policy will pay for mold coverage too.
Especially in these high humidity climates, mold just feeds off of moisture. And if
Mm-hmm.
you've got this moisture that's occurring on a regular basis, mold can cause some serious health issues as well. We've had a lot of clients move out of their homes for an extended amount of time while they're doing mold remediation. And a typical homeowner's policy has really limited coverage for mold coverage, right?
It does.
So is that something that you should consider if you live in a high moisture, high humidity environment, that we increase that mold coverage so that if you have to move out of the home or there's some significant remediation efforts that needs to happen, that's definitely something that we should, be considering when we're having these conversations with our clients.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I grew up in the Midwest, right? So I grew up in Iowa, Minnesota. Oh yeah. Right.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, you betcha. In the winter, you just keep a drip like on your, in your faucets. So that especially on outdoor plumbing and outdoor pipes that they don't freeze up. So if you have a faucet that just continuously drips a little bit, there's a stream of water continuously going through those pipes. So it doesn't actually freeze and burst. But you're right. There's like all sorts of tips and tricks that we can go through about specifically freezing pipes.
Yeah, I would say there's two things.
You Southern California guy, you wouldn't know that kind of stuff.
Well, what's interesting, we're starting to see, as a direct result of the pipe burst situation that we had with the freezing pipes in Texas. I had a client in Austin, Texas, and in order to bind coverage, we had to have a low temperature sensor. And the client's like, "I live in Austin. We don't freeze. What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, actually, there was a freezing, situation just a couple of years ago. So in order to bind coverage, we're starting to see, again, mandated from carriers that they have to have a low temperature sensor in certain areas of the home so they can see if it's going to be below a certain temperature, there are steps that you can take to either, open up your pipes to make sure that water's flowing, or to turn off the water so you make sure that there's not going to be a pipe burst.
Yep.
The second thing that even in California that we're starting to see as a mandated requirement are gutter guards, right?
Yeah.
So this is something that I'm not, that I never saw 10 years ago. I would say not even 5 years ago. It was a suggestion, but in order to now bind, or if you are going to bind, a carrier is going to require within a short amount of time that you install gutter guards. So it prevents that ice damming, right? So
Yep.
it takes out, make sure that the leaves and other debris that are flowing off of your roof do not fall into, your gutters and clog up a gutter. That's going to start, prevent a potential ice damming situation.
So we could probably talk about this all day, but I think that honestly, there are some key takeaways that we were able to hopefully talk about and tell people about, if it be what a flood is, some statistics, what water damage could occur at the house, at homes that you're living in. There's a lot of different key takeaways that we kind of hopefully brought to the segment today, and hopefully it was enlightening. So I want to thank you so much for joining me. And flood or water damage? That's the question.
That is the question. And to encapsulate, our conversation, this is a major exposure in our industry. Flood and water damage. I mean, we looked at water damage, just water damage, not flood, but water damage alone on an annual basis is between $13 to $20 billion in losses. So it's a big exposure, it's a big risk, and there's lots of things we can do to prevent them.
And people wonder why their homeowners insurance is increasing.
Yeah.
The premium. Yeah. Well, thank you, Tyler. I appreciate it. And as always, with the risk rundown, stay safe and stay protected. We'll see you next time. Thanks.